In this video we are going to be looking at what were the long-term causes of World War I. Our learning intention for today's session is to explore the long-term causes of World War I. The success criteria will be to identify what the long-term causes were, to explain the long-term causes, and to evaluate whether the long-term causes made war inevitable. So, what is a long-term cause? So a long-term cause is something that has existed for years, decades, or even centuries before an event took place. So it's a cause and event that's been building for numbers of years. Whereas, on the other hand, a short-term cause is something that happens immediately before or soon before an event takes place. So, for example, last session we looked at the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. That would have been a short-term cause of World War I because it happened very near to the event. So, with that, what are the long-term causes of World War I? Well, there are a few. Firstly, there is militarism, which in the short definition is the building up of armed forces, so armed forces being army, military, etc. In the decades before World War I, many European countries began to practice and expand and strengthen their military forces, so they were building up their military. Specifically, France and Germany were heavily involved in what was called an arms race, in which each country doubled their armies between 1817 and 1914. So in that 45 or so years, they were racing to build up the biggest armies and the most powerful army. There was also a competitive naval race between Britain and Germany in the years leading up to the war. Britain had the largest navy in the world, which it needed to keep hold of its empire. Germany viewed the British navy as a threat, and so they were looking to build up their own navy in order to rival the British navy. Obviously, Britain would not have been very happy about this, and they would therefore be competing back with Germany to make sure they continue to have the strongest navy, because without their navy they wouldn't be able to keep hold of their colonies across the seas. Second long-term cause is something called imperialism, which we've looked at in the past. Imperialism is all about expansion of empires, growing empires, taking over territories and making them colonies. The powerful European empires were all trying to expand, particularly into Africa. Britain, France and Germany were all racing to control different parts of Africa in what became known as the scramble for Africa. So you've got these three major European powers all moving into Africa, trying to take over different sections of it and rivaling each other for control. This caused much tension and anger between the countries, especially as Germany controlled less territory in Africa, and so was very unhappy that France and Britain had more control. So Germany were very much looking to try and get more control in Africa to put them on a level playing field with France and England. Last long-term cause is something called nationalism, which is all about loyalty to your country. So nationalism was a major cause of World War I because it caused unrest to grow in certain parts of Europe. For example, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which we looked at last week, was not made up of one single nation, but instead had many different groups. Many of these groups in the early part of the 20th century were looking to have control over themselves and wanted to be independent and free from the rule of the empire. This was especially true in an area of Europe called the Balkans in the southeast, where many countries wanted to become independent. Last week we looked at the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, where this issue came particularly to the front, where Bosnia were looking to be independent from Austria-Hungary, and Serbia, an independent country, was looking to help them. So this idea of becoming a national country of your own, breaking away from empires, was becoming a bigger and bigger problem as the 20th century began. So, those are the long-term causes. What you're going to be doing with that today is there are a few different tasks I'd like you to do. Firstly, I'd like you to describe in your own words what we mean by the following long-term causes. So you've got militarism, nationalism and imperialism there. So definition, in your own words, what do those three things mean? Then, For each of those, what I want you to do is give a short explanation as to why it could have led to World War One. So explain why militarism would lead to war. Explain why nationalism would lead to war. Explain why imperialism would lead to war. Try and include some examples in there if you can. Number 3 is an inference question. So we've got an image there on the right, which is a satirical image of the different European powers. What I want you to do is tell me what you can infer from the source about the cause of World War One. So have a look. What's going on in the image? Why could that have led to war? What is it inferring? Question 4. I would like you to evaluate which long-term cause you think would have been most likely to lead to war and why. So out of those 3 long-term causes we looked at, which one do you think would be most likely and why? So I expect an explanation in there. Finally, there's an extension challenge for those of you who get through that rather quickly. Do you think that long-term causes meant that World War One was inevitable? So do you think that because of these things that are going on in the background that war was definitely going to happen, regardless of whether Franz Ferdinand was assassinated or not? So that one is your prediction. I do expect some explanation to show how and why you think a certain way. All of these need to be in full sentences. Make sure you put in plenty of effort in, or I will email you back to tell you to add more to your work. So that's your task for today. Off you go.